December 22nd, 1944, Luxembourg. A gray dawn barely breaks through low clouds and drifting snow. The wind knifes across the parade ground, sharp enough to sting the eyes. Boots crunch on frozen gravel. Somewhere nearby, an engine coughs to life and dies again. Inside a temporary headquarters, canvas walls sagging under the weight of winter, General George S. Patton stands hunched over a wooden table, gloved hands spread flat on a map of the Ardennes. His helmet is off, his pistols are gone. This is not the Patton the press knows. A single bulb swings overhead, throwing shadows across his face, deep lines etched by years of war and anger and unrelenting motion. He reaches into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulls out a small leather-bound notebook. The pages are creased, the edges worn soft by constant handling. This book never leaves him. Patton flips it open and begins to write. The pencil scratches hard, fast. There is no flourish, no performance, only heat. Outside, men are freezing in foxholes, fighting for their lives against a German offensive that has ripped open the Allied front. Inside, Patton is fighting a different war, one that has been building for years. A war against what he believes is hesitation, ego, and squandered victory at the very top of the Allied command. He pauses, looks at the map again, and writes something he will never say out loud. You can almost feel it, the pressure behind his eyes, the fury kept just beneath the surface. This is the real Patton, not the speeches, not the medals, not the ivory-handled pistols. This is the man alone with his thoughts, and what he thinks of his fellow generals would shock the world. Patton's diary is not neat, it is not careful, it was never meant to be read. He writes as a man talking to himself, or perhaps to history. Sentences trail off, names are underlined twice. Some entries are only a few lines long, others spill across pages in a single breathless surge. Praise is rare, contempt is not. For Patton, war is movement, speed, shock, relentless aggression. He believes, no, he knows, that wars are won by generals who act faster than their enemies can think. And by 1944, he is convinced that the greatest obstacle to Allied victory is no longer Germany. It is the Allied High Command. The seeds of this bitterness are planted years earlier. November 1942, North Africa. Patton arrives in the desert as American forces reel from humiliation at Kasserine Pass. U.S. units have broken under German pressure. Commanders hesitate. Orders conflict. Men die because no one is clearly in charge. Patton takes over Second Corps like a man snapping a whip. Helmets on, neckties banned, salutes enforced. Discipline is immediate and brutal. But so is effectiveness. The troops stiffen, the line holds, then it advances.
Patton tastes something dangerous here. Proof. Proof that decisive leadership works, and proof that indecision kills. In his diary, he writes that American soldiers are brave, capable, eager to fight, but only if led properly. The implication is clear. Someone has failed them. He doesn't name names yet, but he's thinking about them. By the time the Allies invade Sicily in July 1943, Patton's resentment has sharpened into a blade. Operation Husky is supposed to be a clean, coordinated strike. British and American forces land on the island, pushing inland to seize ports and airfields. On paper, it's elegant. In reality, it's chaos. Orders change, boundaries shift, opportunities appear and vanish. Patton, commanding the U.S. 7th Army, sees openings everywhere. German units are retreating in disarray, roads undefended, entire enemy formations are vulnerable to encirclement. He moves, fast, too fast for some. His drive across Sicily is aggressive, daring, and critically successful. Palermo falls, American columns race eastward. Patton reaches Messina just as the last German units evacuate across the strait. But even in victory, he is seething, because he believes it should have been more. In his diary, he fumes that the Germans escaped not because they were clever, but because the Allies were slow. He writes of lost chances and bungling coordination. He complains that orders are written by committees, not commanders. And hovering over it all is one name he will return to again and again: Eisenhower. Dwight D. Eisenhower is the supreme Allied commander, calm, diplomatic, political. Everything Patton is not. To Patton, Eisenhower is too cautious, too willing to compromise, too concerned with alliance management, and not concerned enough with annihilating the enemy. In public, Patton is respectful, loyal. He understands the chain of command. In private, his diary is merciless. He accuses Eisenhower of lacking killer instinct, of allowing the enemy time to recover, of mistaking caution for wisdom. Patton believes that every pause, every delay, every negotiated decision gives Germany another day to breathe, another day to kill Allied soldiers. And Patton takes that personally.
You can feel it in his writing, the sense of a man watching what he believes is history being mishandled in real time. Then there is Montgomery, Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery of Britain, Monty. To Patton, Montgomery is not just wrong, he is unbearable. Montgomery is methodical, deliberate, theatrical. He cultivates an image of meticulous planning and iron control. He insists on overwhelming force before every major move. Patton despises this. In his diary, Montgomery becomes a recurring antagonist. Patton mocks his slowness, his ego, his need for attention. He fumes at what he sees as Montgomery's habit of claiming credit while shifting blame. Worst of all, Patton believes Montgomery's caution costs lives. He writes that Montgomery fights wars as if time were unlimited, that he lacks the fire to pursue a beaten enemy, that he mistakes delay for prudence. And when Allied strategy bends to accommodate Montgomery's demands, as Patton believes it often does, the bitterness deepens. This is no longer a professional disagreement. This is personal. By the time of the Normandy invasion in June 1944, Patton was a coiled spring. Ironically, he is not on the beaches. Instead, he commands a phantom army, 1st U.S. Army Group, designed to deceive the Germans into believing the main invasion will come at Pas-de-Calais. It is one of the most successful deceptions in military history, but Patton hates it. He wants to fight. In his diary, he writes of frustration bordering on rage. He knows the Germans fear him. He knows his presence could accelerate the breakout, and he is sidelined, waiting while others shape the battle. When he finally takes command of 3rd Army after the breakout from Normandy, the release is explosive. Patton does what he does best. He moves. The dash across France in the summer of 1944 is one of the most stunning operational advances of the war. Patton's columns slice through German lines, crossing rivers, seizing towns, and overrunning supply depots. For a brief moment, it feels like vindication. But even here, Patton sees disaster in the making. Fuel shortages halt his advance. Priorities shift north toward Montgomery's push in the Netherlands, Operation Market Garden. Patton fumes as supplies are diverted. He believes Germany is reeling, ripe for destruction. Instead, he watches the momentum bleed away. In his diary, the entries grow darker. He writes that the war could end in 1944, should end in 1944, if only the Allies would concentrate their strength and strike hard. He calls the decision-making timid. He suggests that politics is trumping military logic. And Market Garden fails.
British airborne units are crushed. The Rhine remains uncrossed. Patton is furious. But the worst is yet to come. Which brings us back to that frozen morning in Luxembourg, December 1944. The Germans have struck through the Ardennes in a desperate gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. Allied lines buckle, units are surrounded, panic spreads. Patton, once again, reacts faster than anyone expects. In one of the most remarkable feats of command in the war, he pivots Third Army north, slamming into the German flank and relieving Bastogne. It is brilliant, it is decisive, and it proves, in Patton's mind, everything he has been saying all along. Speed matters, decisiveness matters, and delay is deadly. That morning, as snow swirls outside and the fate of thousands hangs in the balance, Patton closes his diary and snaps it shut. He has written something final, something damning, a conclusion he has been circling for years. The war has been prolonged not by enemy strength, but by Allied hesitation. And he knows with cold certainty that history may never hear these words, unless someone opens this book. The pencil returns to the page. Patton does not write like a man recording events. He writes like a man arguing with ghosts. December 23, 1944, evening. The snow has not stopped. The headquarters is quieter now. The day's orders are issued. Staff officers murmur over coffee gone cold. Patton sits alone again, diary open, his greatcoat still on. He does not remove it. There is no ceremony here. He writes about Bastogne. Not the heroics, that will come later in speeches and headlines, but the fact that Bastogne was ever in danger at all. He writes that the German attack should never have achieved surprise, that intelligence warnings were dismissed, that commanders convinced themselves the enemy was finished because they wanted to believe it. Wishful thinking, he scrawls. Then the names begin to appear again. Eisenhower first. Patton's criticism is not loud, it is colder than that. He accuses Eisenhower of being reactive instead of anticipatory, of running the war like a conference instead of a campaign.
In one entry, Patton notes, almost clinically, that Eisenhower's greatest strength, his ability to manage allies, is also his greatest weakness. Coalition warfare requires compromise. Patton understands this intellectually, but emotionally, he believes compromise is strangling victory. Patton writes that Eisenhower waits for consensus where none is needed. Those decisions arrive hours or days too late. That the Germans, battered as they are still dangerous precisely because they are allowed time to regroup. You can almost see him pause mid-sentence, jaw tightening. He does not question Eisenhower's loyalty, he questions his instincts. And in Patton's world, that is unforgivable. Then Montgomery. Always Montgomery. If Eisenhower earns Patton's disappointment, Montgomery earns his contempt. Patton describes Montgomery as a man who fights battles for applause, who prepares endlessly, then advances cautiously, then claims brilliance when the enemy is already retreating. The diary entries drip with sarcasm. Patton mocks Montgomery's press conferences, his beret, his habit of explaining the war as if no one else understands it. He writes that Montgomery mistakes showmanship for leadership and caution for intelligence. But beneath the insults lies something sharper. Patton believes Montgomery is afraid to fail, and to Patton, fear is poison. He writes that Montgomery's insistence on overwhelming force creates parabasis, that waiting for perfection in war means missing opportunity, that by the time Montgomery moves, the moment has passed. And Patton believes those moments, missed again and again, have lengthened the war by months, maybe more.
What makes the diary unsettling is not the anger, it's the consistency. Patton does not rant once and move on. The same criticisms recur across years, across campaigns, across continents. This is not a bad day vented onto paper. This is a world view. Patton sees war as a test of will, not management. He believes Germany can be broken only by relentless pressure, no pauses, no breathing room, no cautious halts. And in his mind, Allied strategy violates this principle repeatedly. North Africa, Sicily, Italy, Normandy, France, the Netherlands. Always, he writes, the same pattern. Advance, hesitate, allow the enemy to recover, repeat. Italy is a particularly bitter chapter. Patton is sidelined after the infamous slapping incidents in Sicily, a public disgrace that costs him field command for months. He accepts responsibility in public.
In private, the diary seethes. He believes the punishment is excessive, political, that his aggressive edge frightens men who prefer safety to victory. As the Italian campaign grinds forward, bloody, slow, indecisive, Patton watches from the sidelines and fumes. He writes that Italy is a strategic dead end, draining manpower for marginal gains. The terrain favors defense. The Germans are happy to trade ground for time. Every delay confirms his belief. This is not how wars are won. When he finally returns to command in France, Patton feels time slipping through his fingers. The breakout from Normandy is the moment he has been waiting for. German lines collapse, roads are open, enemy units are disorganized. Patton drives the Third Army forward like a thrown spear. And then fuel. Supplies are diverted north. Montgomery's market garden takes priority. Patton's diary entries from September 1944 are among the most furious he ever wrote. He calls the supply decisions criminal. He writes that the Germans are running scared and that stopping now is madness. He insists that a concentrated thrust eastward could shatter German resistance before winter. Instead, he watches as his tanks idle for lack of gasoline. Market Garden fails. The Rhine remains uncrossed. Winter arrives. Patton writes one line, underlined twice. We had them and let them go. Yet even as he condemns others, the diary reveals Patton's own doubts. He wonders privately if he is too aggressive, too impatient, too convinced of his own correctness. But those moments are fleeting. Patton's self-criticism never lingers long enough to blunt his certainty. Because every time he sees hesitation rewarded, his faith in boldness hardens. The Battle of the Bulge becomes his proof. When the German offensive erupts, Patton reacts within hours, not days, not weeks. He has already considered the possibility, already planned contingencies, already visualized the map. Third Army turns north in freezing conditions, executing a maneuver many believed impossible. Roads are clogged, the weather is brutal, men are exhausted. They move anyway. Bastogne is relieved. The German offensive breaks. Patton does not celebrate in his diary. He indicts. He writes that the victory was won despite Allied surprise, not because of preparation. That had the Germans struck harder or earlier, the results could have been catastrophic. And again, he circles back to the same thought. This should never have happened. As 1945 approaches, Patton's writing takes on a strange dual tone. On one hand, confidence. He believes Germany is finished, militarily beaten, cracking from within. On the other hand, bitterness. He writes that the final victory will be slower than necessary, that politics will interfere. Those lines on maps will matter more than the destruction of the enemy. He grows particularly frustrated with restrictions placed on his advance toward the east. He believes American forces should drive deeper, faster, toward Berlin, toward the heart of Germany. But again, priorities are set elsewhere. Zones are negotiated, lines are drawn. Patton obeys and writes. What makes these diaries explosive is not just what Patton says, but when he says it. These are not reflections written years later with the benefit of hindsight. They are raw reactions, scribbled in real time before outcomes are known. When Patton accuses Allied leaders of squandering opportunity, he is not judging from the safety of victory. He is gambling his reputation on belief. That belief that the war could have ended sooner, with fewer dead, never leaves him. By April 1945, Germany had collapsed. Patton's Third Army tears through Bavaria. Towns surrender without resistance. Columns of prisoners stretch for miles. Victory is undeniable, but Patton is not satisfied. His diary entries from the final weeks of the war are some of the most unsettling. He writes that Germany was beaten by force, but not destroyed in spirit. The Allies are already making mistakes in the occupation, that political concerns are once again overriding military reality. He even writes, dangerously, that the Western Allies may one day regret allowing the Soviets so much ground. These are not thoughts meant for public ears. They are prophetic and radioactive. Patton closes his diary for the last time in Europe with a sentence that feels less like triumph and more like a warning. That wars are not won by committees, that history punishes hesitation, that boldness, even when flawed, is preferable to caution that costs lives. He never intended the world to read this, but diaries have a way of surviving their authors. And the judgments Patton wrote in pencil, angry, impatient, convinced, would one day challenge the very narrative of Allied unity and flawless leadership. Because if Patton is right, then victory came at a cost no one wanted to count.